The Bible is the most fascinating book in existence. It's like no other ancient manuscript. And when you understand what the Bible is and what it took to bring it to us, you can't help but have respect and amazement and understand why so many people believe that it is truly the Word of God. See, the Bible is not actually a book. It's a collection of ancient books. And there are two general divisions or classifications for that, which we refer to as the Old Testament and the New Testament. 39 books comprise what we refer to as the Old Testament, and 27 make up the New. The Old Testament can be categorized, its books, into the following. There is the Law, which contained the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Then there are the books of history, which would be books like 1st and 2nd Samuel, Ruth, Joshua, Judges, which record the history of all the events of the Bible times. Then we would have the books of prophecies, books that were written by prophets. Now, what happens for people when they decide to just read the Bible straight through, they can become confused or lost, because they can start out in Genesis and say, man, that's a fascinating story. They can reach Exodus and say, wow, that's exciting. And then they'll bump into Leviticus and go, oh my God, what happened to the storyline? This is confusing about all these washings and killings and weighing of things, which they don't recognize that they're all different books written for different purposes. But when we understand what they are and how God brought them to it and what they were for, you can find absolute amazement in what's called the Bible. Let's talk about the chronological order of the Bible. The chronological order deals with the events, the storyline to the Bible. It's the history of what was taking place, the people, the times, the events that are recorded. But what's fascinating about the Bible that's unlike any other book in ancient literature is not only do we have the chronological events recorded, but we also have other books that coincide with it that gives us an insight to what was actually going on. And really what we gather by them are the thoughts, the feelings, and perspective of God as to what was happening during those times. It's a commentary to all that was transpired in the chronological order. It'd kind of be like this. Women tend to be better at this than men, but if a couple wanted to record their marriage and their family, and so you had a photo album. You know, some ladies are really fanatical about that, where they record every event that transpires, first anniversary, the birth of a baby, first birthdays, and all the rest. The photo album would be like the chronological events, because as you would turn through the pages, you would see in the order of time the different things that transpired. But it's also fascinating. The Bible is like also having a personal journal as well. It's like the person who took the photo album would actually journal and record their emotions, their feelings, what was taking place during that time and how they viewed it. And so we see the books that coincide with the chronological order record for us the feelings, the impressions, the thoughts and perspective of God, of what was happening during that time. Let me give you an example. In 1st and 2nd Samuel, we see recorded the history of David. David, the greatest king of Israel. But also the Psalms give us a commentary about what David was feeling, what was going on during that period of time, and all the events that we see recorded in those historical books. Or, like in 1st and 2nd Kings, when it talks about Solomon, the great king of Israel. Solomon also wrote for us Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, and so we understand his feelings and thoughts of what was transpiring at that time. But other kings that were recorded during that time, like King Hezekiah, Isaiah gives us a perspective. As God raised up prophets, we begin to feel how God felt, what he was saying to the nation during all of this time. And so the kings that were part of the leadership of Israel that led eventually to the fall of the nation of Israel, their capture and exile into the land of Babylon, we see different ones like Jeremiah and others who gave what God was saying during that period of time. And then during the time of exile, and then the restoration of the nation of Israel, recorded in the history like in Ezra and Nehemiah, but also prophets like Haggai and Zephaniah and Zechariah. They told what God was feeling during that period of time. And so All of this leads up to 400 years after the book of Malachi. There's 400 years of silence when God doesn't say anything anymore. Let's pick up with the New Testament, because after 400 years of silence, God picks up right where he left off. He sends a messenger declaring that the Messiah is coming, the one that had been prophesied for ages past. And then it records the birth of the one true Messiah, Jesus Christ. The 27 books that comprise the New Testament can be broken down as follows. 4 of them are the stories of Jesus, which we call the Gospels. They are 4 different eyewitness accounts of the life of Jesus Christ over a 3-year period during his time of ministry in Israel. And although Luke was not himself an eyewitness, he had carefully interviewed the actual eyewitnesses to the events and gave us his findings in that. And then there's a book of history, which is the book of Acts. As the New Testament church becomes established, Acts records the history of how that unfolded. Then we have the epistles, which are the letters to the actual churches, the ones that were talked about in being established in the book of Acts. The epistles tell us of what was happening. These letters record what was going on in these actual congregation. And then there's a book of prophecy, which is the book of Revelation. These books make up the New Testament. Let's talk about how we have the New Testament books, what's referred to as the canon. See, the word canon comes from an ancient Greek word which literally means a measuring rod or a reed. It signifies a standard or a rule that was developed that all of the books would be judged by as to whether or not they were inspired. See, during the persecution of the Christian church, the emperors of the Roman government determined that Christians were enemies of the state, that they were both traitors and atheists. Atheists because they didn't believe in the gods of that time, nor in the deity of Caesar. And therefore that also made them traitors of the Roman Empire. One of the Roman empires, Diocletian, went so far as to rule that all of the manuscripts that we refer to now as the New Testament were to be discovered and found and burned. And anybody found in possession of them would not only be arrested, but would be executed. And it came as a test as to what books the followers of Jesus would actually be willing to die for. When Constantine became emperor of the Roman Empire, he later became a Christian and declared Christianity not only legal, but this is fascinating. The very empire responsible for the execution of the head of the Christian church, Jesus Christ, was now determined that that the actual religion of the Roman Empire, the official religion, was Christianity. And so Constantine gathered a council together, the Council of Nicaea, and commissioned them to determine which books would make up the New Testament, which ones were inspired, which ones were the Word of God, so that they could be distributed and collected as the New Testament. The councils that were brought together had the responsibility of making the determination which books were inspired. In other words, which books were actually the Word of God. So they created a test of canonicity. The canon was the standard that all the books would be judged by. And so there were 5 elements that created the test. Number 1 was the apostolic authorship. Was the book actually written by an apostle or a close associate to an apostle, like Luke or like Mark? Mark was a disciple of Peter, and most people believe the Gospel of Mark was really the thoughts of Peter as to the events that he had witnessed and shared in the life of Jesus. The second test was the test of spiritual content. In other words, was the book used? Was it read in the churches? And did its contents prove to be a means of spiritual edification? Third test that they used was the doctrinal soundness. Was the book doctrinally sound? In other words, was there any heresy that was contrary to the accepted doctrine of believers? The fourth test was usage. Was it quoted and was it used by the early church fathers? The people who were disciples of the original apostles, people like Clement and Polycarp and Justus. did they quote from? Did they reference these books? And the 27 books of the New Testament were all quoted from and referenced by the early church fathers. And the last and most important test of all is the test of divine inspiration. Did these books provide proof or evidence to such that they were divinely inspired? After the Council of Nicaea and after the Council of Hippo, the 27 books that we know today as the New Testament were determined to be the words of God. Now maybe you understand why I say the Bible is the most fascinating book in existence. And the truth is, we need to read it for ourselves because this book is alive. This book is eternal. It never grows old. I mean, think about it. What do you have to lose to actually read it for yourselves? But I believe what you'll find out is what people have found out over the centuries, that it will help you just as much today as it has done in any generation, in any era of Bible times. And so I encourage you, get in the book and read it for yourself.